HMS Queen Mary. This article is about the Royal Navy battlecruiser. For other ships named Queen Mary, see Queen Mary, ship in parentheses. The HMS Queen Mary was the last battlecruiser built by the Royal Navy before the First World War. The sole member of her class, Queen Mary shared many features with the Lion-class battlecruisers, including her 8 13.5-inch 343mm guns. She was completed in 1913 and participated in the Battle of Heligoland Bight as part of the Grand Fleet in 1914. Like most of the modern British battlecruisers, the ship never left the North Sea during the war. As part of the 1st Battlecruiser Squadron, Queen Mary attempted to intercept a German force that bombarded the North Sea coast of England in December 1914, but was unsuccessful. The ship was refitted in early 1915 and missed the Battle of Dogger Bank in January, but participated in the largest fleet action of the war, the Battle of Jutland, in mid-1916. She was hit twice by the German battlecruiser Derfflinger during the early part of the battle, and her magazines exploded shortly afterwards, sinking her with the loss of 1,266 of her 1,286 crew members. Her wreck was discovered in 1991 and rests in pieces, some of which are upside down, on the bed of the North Sea. Queen Mary is designated as a protected place under the Protection of Military Remains Act 1986 as a war grave. Design. Queen Mary was ordered, together with the 4 battleships of the King George V class, under the 1910-11 naval program. As was the usual pattern of the time, only 1 battlecruiser was ordered per naval program. She differed from her predecessors of the Lion class in the distribution of her secondary armament and armor, and in the location of the officers' quarters. Every capital ship since the design of the battleship Dreadnought in 1905 had placed the officers' quarters closer to their action stations amidships. After complaints from the fleet, Queen Mary was the first battlecruiser to restore the quarters to their traditional place in the stern. In addition, she was the first battlecruiser to mount a sternwalk. Queen Mary, the only ship of her name ever to serve in the Royal Navy, was named for Mary of Teck, the wife of King George V. The Queen's representative at the ship's christening on the 20th of March 1912 was the wife of Viscount Allendale. General characteristics. Slightly larger than the preceding Lion-class ships, Queen Mary had an overall length of 700 feet 1 inch, 213.4 meters, a beam of 89 feet 1 inch, 27.2 meters, and a draft of 32 feet 4 inches, 9.9 meters at deep load. The ship normally displaced 26,770 long tons, or 27,200 tons, and 31,650 long tons, 32,160 tons, at deep load, over 1,000 long tons, or 1,016 tons, more than earlier ships. She had a metacentric height of 5.92 feet, 1.8 meters, at deep load. In peacetime, the crew numbered 997 officers and ratings, but this increased to 1,275 during wartime. Propulsion. The ship had 2 paired sets of Parsons direct-drive steam turbines housed in separate engine rooms. Each set consisted of a high-pressure turbine driving an outboard propeller shaft and a low-pressure turbine driving an inner shaft. A cruising stage was built into the casing of each high-pressure turbine for economical steaming at low speeds. The turbines had a designed output of 75,000 shaft horsepower, 56,000 kilowatts, which is 5,000 shaft horsepower, 3,700 kilowatts, more than her predecessors. On sea trials in May and June 1913, Queen Mary achieved more than 83,000 shaft horsepower, 62,000 kilowatts, although she barely exceeded her design speed of 28 knots. The steam plant consisted of 42 Yarrow boilers arranged in 7 boiler rooms. Maximum bunkerage was 3,600 long tons of coal and 1,170 long tons of fuel oil to be sprayed on the coal to increase its burn rate. Her range was 5,610 nautical miles, 10,390 kilometers, at a speed of 10 knots. Armament. Queen Mary mounted 8 BL 13.5-inch Mark V guns in 4 twin hydraulically powered turrets, designated A, B, Q, and X from bow to stern. The guns could be depressed to -3 degrees and elevated to 20 degrees, although the director controlling the turrets was limited to 15 degrees 21 minutes until prisms were installed before the Battle of Jutland in May 1916 to allow full elevation. They fired 1,400-pound, 635-kilogram projectiles at a muzzle velocity of 2,490 feet per second, 760 meters per second. At 20 degrees elevation, this provided a maximum range of 23,740 yards, 21,708 meters, with armor-piercing shells. The rate of fire of these guns was 1.5 to 2 rounds per minute. Queen Mary carried a total of 880 rounds during wartime for 110 shells per gun. Her secondary armament consisted of 16 BL 4-inch Mark 7 guns, most of which were mounted in casemates on the forecastle deck, unlike the arrangement in the Lion class. The guns could depress to -7 degrees and had a maximum elevation of 15 degrees. They fired 14-kilogram projectiles at a muzzle velocity of 860 meters per second at a maximum range of 10,400 meters. The ship carried 150 rounds per gun. The ship was built without any anti-aircraft guns, but 2 guns were fitted in October 1914. One was a QF 6-pounder Hotchkiss gun and the other was a QF 3-inch, both on high-angle mountings. The Hotchkiss fired a 2.7-kilogram shell at a muzzle velocity of 540 meters per second. The 3-inch gun fired a 5.7-kilogram shell at a muzzle velocity of 794 meters per second with a maximum effective ceiling of 7,010 meters. 2 21-inch submerged torpedo tubes were fitted, one on each broadside. 14 Mark II torpedoes were carried, each of which had a warhead of 181 kilograms of TNT. Their range was 4,115 meters at 45 knots, or 9,144 meters at 29 knots. Fire control. In February 1913, the Admiralty bought 5 sets of fire control equipment from Arthur Paulin for comparative trials with the equipment designed by Commander Frederick Dreyer. One set was mounted in Queen Mary and consisted of a 2.7-meter Argo rangefinder located on top of the conning tower that fed range data into an Argo Clock Mark IV, a mechanical fire control computer, located in the transmitting station below the conning tower. The clock converted the information into range and deflection data for use by the guns. The target's data was also graphically recorded on a plotting table to assist the gunnery officer in predicting the movement of the target. The aft torpedo director tower was the backup gunnery control position. All 4 turrets were provided with 9-foot rangefinders, and B and X turrets were further outfitted to serve as auxiliary control positions. Fire control technology advanced quickly during the years immediately preceding World War I, and the development of the director firing system was a major advance. This consisted of a fire control director mounted high in the ship, which electrically provided elevation and training angles to the turrets via pointers, which the turret crewmen only had to follow. The guns were fired simultaneously, which aided in spotting the shell splashes and minimized the effects of the roll on the dispersion of the shells. Queen Mary received her director before the Battle of Jutland. Armor. The armor protection given to Queen Mary was similar to that of the Lions. Her waterline belt of Krupp cemented armor was also 9 inches, or 229 millimeters, thick between B and X turrets. It thinned to 102 millimeters towards the ship's ends, but did not reach either the bow or the stern. In addition, the ship was given an upper armor belt with a maximum thickness of 6 inches over the same length as the thickest part of the waterline armor, thinning to 127 millimeters abreast the turret ends. 4-inch transverse bulkheads closed off the ends of the armored citadel. High-tensile steel plating, cheaper than nickel steel but equally as effective, was used for the protective decks. The lower armored deck was generally only 25 millimeter thick, except outside the citadel where it was 64 millimeters. The upper armored deck was situated at the top of the upper armor belt and was also only 1 inch thick. The forecastle deck ranged from 25 to 38 millimeters. The gun turrets had 9-inch fronts and sides, while their roofs were 2.5 to 3.25 inches thick. The barbettes were protected by 9 inches of armor above the deck, but it thinned to 8 inches above the armor deck and 3 inches below it. The forward 4-inch guns were protected by 3-inch sides and a 2-inch high-tensile steel deck overhead. The conning tower sides were 10 inches thick with 3-inch roofs and communication tubes. Her aft torpedo director tower was protected by 6-inch walls and a 3-inch cast steel roof. High-tensile steel torpedo bulkheads 2.5 inches thick were fitted abreast the magazine and shell rooms. Her funnel uptakes were protected by high-tensile steel splinter armor 1.5 inches thick on the sides and 1 inch thick on the ends between the upper and forecastle decks. Construction and career. Queen Mary was laid down at Palmer's Shipbuilding and Iron Company at their shipyard in Jarrow on 6th of March 1911. She was launched on the 20th of March 1912 and completed in August 1913 at a total cost of £2,078,491, including guns. The ship came under the command of Captain Reginald Hall on the 1st of July and was commissioned on the 4th of September. Assigned to the 1st Battlecruiser Squadron under the command of Rear Admiral David Beatty, Queen Mary and the rest of the 1st BCS made a port visit to Brest in February 1914, and the squadron visited Russia in June. First World War. Battle of Heligoland Bight. Queen Mary's first action was as part of the battlecruiser force under the command of Beatty during the Battle of Heligoland Bight on 28th of August 1914. Beatty's ships had originally been intended as distant support of the British cruisers and destroyers closer to the German coast in case the large ships of the High Seas Fleet sortied in response to the British attacks. They turned south at full speed at 11:35 when the British light forces failed to disengage on schedule, and the rising tide meant that German capital ships would be able to clear the bar at the mouth of the Jade estuary. The brand new light cruiser Arethusa had been crippled earlier in the battle and was under fire from the German light cruisers SMS Strasbourg and SMS Köln when Beatty's battle cruisers loomed out of the mist at 12:37. Strasbourg was able to duck into the mists and evade fire, but Köln remained visible and was quickly crippled by fire from the squadron. Beatty, however, was distracted from the task of finishing her off by the sudden appearance of the elderly light cruiser SMS Ariadne directly ahead of him. He turned in pursuit and reduced her to a flaming hulk in only 3 salvos at a range of 6,000 yards. At 13:10, Beatty turned north and made a general signal to retire. Beatty's main body encountered the crippled Köln shortly after turning north, and she was sunk by 2 salvos from Lion. Raid on Scarborough. The Imperial German Navy had decided on a strategy of bombarding British towns on the North Sea coast in an attempt to draw out the Royal Navy and destroy elements of it in detail. An earlier raid on Yarmouth on the 3rd of November had been partially successful, but a larger-scale operation was devised by Admiral Franz von Hipper afterward. The fast battlecruisers were to conduct the bombardment, while the entire High Seas Fleet was to station itself east of Dogger Bank to provide cover for their return and to destroy any elements of the Royal Navy that responded to the raid. But what the Germans did not know was that the British were reading the German naval codes and were planning to catch the raiding force on its return journey, although they were not aware that the High Seas Fleet would be at sea as well. Together with the 6 dreadnoughts of the 2nd Battle Squadron, Beatty's 1st BCS, now reduced to 4 ships, including Lion, was detached from the Grand Fleet in an attempt to intercept the Germans near Dogger Bank. By this time, Queen Mary was commanded by Captain C.I. Prowse. Hipper set sail on 15th of December 1914 for another such raid and successfully bombarded several English towns, but British destroyers escorting the 1st BCS had already encountered German destroyers of the High Seas Fleet at 5:15 and fought an inconclusive action with them. Vice Admiral Sir George Warrender, commanding the 2nd Battle Squadron, had received a signal at 5:40 that the destroyer Lynx was engaging enemy destroyers, though Beatty had not. The destroyer Shark spotted the armored cruiser SMS Rune and her escorts at about 700, but she could not transmit the message until 7:25. Warrender received the signal, as did the battlecruiser New Zealand, but Beatty did not, despite the fact that New Zealand had been specifically tasked to relay messages between the destroyers and Beatty. Warrender attempted to pass on Shark's message to Beatty at 7:36, but he did not manage to make contact until 7:55. Beatty reversed course when he got the message and dispatched New Zealand to search for Rune. She was being overhauled by New Zealand when Beatty received messages that Scarborough was being shelled at 900. Beatty ordered New Zealand to rejoin the squadron and turned west for Scarborough. The British forces split going around the shallow southwest patch of the Dogger Bank. Beatty's ships passed to the north while Warrender pressed to the south as they headed west to block the main route through the minefields defending the English coast. This left a 15 nautical mile gap between them through which the German light forces began to move. At 12:25, the light cruisers of the 2nd Scouting Group began to pass the British forces searching for Hipper. The light cruiser Southampton spotted the light cruiser SMS Stralsund and signaled a report to Beatty. At 12:30, Beatty turned his battlecruisers towards the German ships. Beatty presumed the German cruisers were the advance screen for Hipper's ships, however, those were some 31 miles behind. The 2nd Light Cruiser Squadron, which had been screening for Beatty's ships, detached to pursue the German cruisers, but a misinterpreted signal from the British battlecruisers sent them back to their screening positions. This confusion allowed the German light cruisers to escape and alerted Hipper to the location of the British battlecruisers. The German battlecruisers wheeled to the northeast of the British forces and made good their escape. Queen Mary was refitting in January and February 1915 and did not participate in the Battle of Dogger Bank. She received her main battery director in December 1915. Battle of Jutland. On the 31st of May 1916, Queen Mary put to sea with the rest of the battlecruiser fleet to intercept a sortie by the High Seas Fleet into the North Sea. The British were able to decode the German radio messages and left their bases before the Germans put to sea. Hipper's battlecruisers spotted the battlecruiser fleet to their west at 1520, but Beatty's ships did not spot the Germans to their east until 1530. 2 minutes later, he ordered a course change to east-southeast to position himself astride the Germans' line of retreat and called his ship's crews to action stations. Hipper ordered his ships to turn to starboard, away from the British, almost 180 degrees, to assume a southeasterly course and reduce speed to 18 knots, to allow 3 light cruisers of the 2nd Scouting Group to catch up. With this turn, Hipper was falling back on the High Seas Fleet, then about 60 nautical miles behind him. Around this time, Beatty altered course to the east as it was quickly apparent that he was still too far north to cut Hipper off. This began what was to be called the Run to the South, as Beatty changed course to steer east-southeast at 1535, paralleling Hipper's course, now that the range closed to under 18,000 yards. The Germans opened fire first at 1548, followed by the British. The British ships were still in the process of making their turn, as only the 2 leading ships, Lion and Princess Royal, had steadied on their course when the Germans opened fire. The German fire was accurate from the beginning, but the British overestimated the range as the German ships blended into the haze. Queen Mary opened fire about 1550 on HMS Seydlitz, using only her forward turrets. By 1554, the range was down to 12,900 yards, and Beatty ordered a course change 2 points to starboard to open up the range at 1557. During this period, Queen Mary made 2 hits on Seydlitz at 1555 and 1557, one of which caused a propellant fire that burnt out her aft superfiring turret. The range had grown too far for accurate shooting, so Beatty altered course 4 points to port to close the range again between 1612 and 1615. This maneuver exposed Lion to the fire of the German battlecruisers, and she was hit several times. The smoke and fumes from these hits caused SMF Derfflinger to lose sight of Lion, which had sheared out of line to starboard, and to switch her fire to Queen Mary, now visible to Derfflinger's gunnery officer as the 2nd ship in the British line and therefore assumed to be Princess Royal at 1616. Queen Mary hit Seydlitz again at 1617 and knocked out 1 gun of her secondary armament. In return, Queen Mary had been hit twice by Seydlitz before 1621 with unknown effects, but the German battlecruiser hit the turret face of Q turret at that time and knocked out the right-hand gun in the turret. By 1625, the range was down to 14,400 yards, and Beatty turned 2 points to starboard to open the range again. This move came too late for Queen Mary, however, as Derfflinger's fire began to take effect, hitting her twice before 1626. 1 shell hit forward and detonated 1 or both of the forward magazines, which broke the ship in 2 near the foremast. Stationed inside Q turret, midshipman Jocelyn Story survived and reported that there had been a large explosion forward which rocked the turret, breaking the left gun in half, the gun breech falling into the working chamber and the right gun coming off its trunnions. Cordite in the working chamber caught fire and produced poisonous fumes that asphyxiated some of the turret's crew. It is doubtful that an explosion forward could have done this, so Q turret may have been struck by the 2nd shell. A further explosion, possibly from shells breaking loose, shook the aft end of the ship as it began to roll over and sink. Tiger, the battlecruiser behind her, was showered with debris from the explosion and forced to steer to port to avoid her remains. 1,266 crewmen were lost, 18 survivors were picked up by the destroyers Laurel, Petard, and Tipperary, and 2 by the Germans. Aftermath. Queen Mary, along with the other Jutland wrecks, has been declared a protected place under the Protection of Military Remains Act 1986 to discourage further damage to the resting place of 1,266 officers and men. Surveys of this site conducted by nautical archaeologist Innes McCartney in 2001 to 2003 have shown the wreck is in 3 sections, with the 2 forward sections being heavily damaged and in pieces. Her aft end is upside down and relatively complete except for her propellers, which have been salvaged. Examination of the damage of the ship has suggested that the initial explosion was not in the magazine of A or B forward main turrets, but instead in the magazine of the forward 4-inch battery. An explosion of the quantity of cordite in the main magazine would also have been sufficient to ignite Q magazine, destroying much more of the ship. The explosion in the smaller magazine would have been sufficient to break the ship in 2, the blast then spreading to the forward magazine and ripping apart the forward section.